Hello, dear learners. I once again welcome you to this MOOC on population and society. The relationship between humans and environment has always been a subject of deliberation in the academia. In the previous module, we have discussed about the environmental changes taking place owing to the growth of population. In this module, that is module 32, titled Major Environmental Concerns and Threat to Human Population, we shall be discussing how the environmental changes are now posing threat to human population. Studies across the globe has illustrated about the intensifying environmental degradation and its impact on humankind. Though natural disasters result in environmental degradation, the damage to the environment, however, is largely caused by anthropogenic factors. We all know that owing to the growth of population, there has been increasing and greater demand for resources like land, water, so on and so forth. To cater to human needs and in the name of development, we have been causing destruction of nature both directly and indirectly. For example, the construction of buildings and expansion of roads have led to more and more deforestation, destruction of forests, etc. So the growth in population has a direct bearing upon the environment, resulting in major environmental changes and greater environmental threats. Now, when there is too much pressure on the environment also begins to pose threat to human life. When there is too much of environmental destruction, then in turn it results in a severe negative consequence, negative impact for human life and livelihood. With the advent of modernity, particularly with the advent of industrialization, we have seen that there has been increasing environmental destructions, and there are studies which shows that the consequence of these environmental destruction, environmental degradation is borne severely by human population and more so by the most vulnerable sections of the human population, like people from the lower class, females, so on and so forth. And these people, people who belong to the marginal classes are the worst victims of environmental degradation. In India too, there have been serious concerns pertaining to environmental degradation, and hence we have different environmental movements for protection of our environment. Let us now try to understand the major environmental concerns of the contemporary times and how it is posing a threat to the human population. So, objectives of this module are to discuss the major environmental concerns of the contemporary times and to discuss the consequences of environmental problems on human life. So, dear learners, we have learned from the previous module that growth of population has resulted in several serious environmental problems like deforestation, pollution of air, water, soil, resource depletion, environmental hazards, so on and so forth. Thus, our environment is continuously changing and environmental conditions are becoming poorer over the years. Now, these worsening environmental conditions are posing a threat to human beings and their survival, and we shall be discussing this in this module. Dear learners, we know that environmental changes and its degradation owing to human activities have led to two major environmental challenges facing the world, that is climate change and global warming, both being intimately related. And we are going to discuss in details about climate change and global warming today. Human activities fundamental to development, industry, land use, energy generation and transport are the root causes of anthropogenic climate change. Now, dear learners, what is climate? Is climate same as weather? Climate is distinguished from weather. It is not the same. Weather is the specific behavior of the climate at a particular period of time, More particularly, weather is the state of atmosphere at any given time, denoting a short time variation. There are many possible ways in which climate is defined. Climate is generally associated with the averages or variability in temperature, precipitation, wind, and cloud. Historically, Earth's climate has never been static. The term climate change refers to change in the longer-term pattern of behavior of the atmosphere over millennia, or more recently as a result of natural process or human activity. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) defines climate change as a change in the state of the climate that can be identified by changes in the mean and or the variability of its properties, and that persists for an extended period, typically decades or longer. So climate change, it is a change that happens over a longer period of time. It refers to any change in the climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change refers to a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of global atmosphere, and that is in addition to natural climate variability observed over a comparable time periods. So, dear learners, climate change indicates change in the climate over a period of time owing to either natural factors or human activities. Now we all know that the climate of our earth is changing. It is tremendously changing. We are experiencing heat waves, we are experiencing droughts, we are experiencing, change of seasons, so on and so forth. So why is this climate changing, and what are the factors relating to climate change? We will be discussing this here. And relating to climate change, as I have earlier mentioned, one very important environmental concern is global warming. Global warming is one of the important factors which has been resulting in, or which have been triggering change in climate. And global warming, our understanding of the origins of global warming, it comes from the works of Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier, a French scientist who in the early part of 19th century calculated the energy that reaches the earth from the sun in the form of sunlight, which is absorbed here and then reflected back. When he calculated the amount of energy reaching the earth and then reflected back from the earth's surface, he got the finding that the earth should be frozen. Therefore, he made the conclusion that the atmosphere of the earth acts like a mantle, keeping a portion of the reflected energy and heat, which makes the planet habitable. He speculated that the carbon dioxide acted as the mantle in the Earth's atmosphere. Later scientists who worked on global warming tried to find out which atmospheric elements trapped the sun's heat and energy. They concluded that major gases like nitrogen and oxygen that composes the atmosphere offers no barrier to the heat loss. So therefore, those gases that trapped the heat, which later came to be known as or termed as the greenhouse gases, were found to be carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, methane, and water vapor, which were present in relatively small amounts in the atmosphere. The scientists came up with the calculation of parts per million ppm to measure the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, since their proportion was very small in the earlier periods. The tiny proportion of these gases managed to keep the temperature suitable for habitation. Therefore, the greenhouse gases created by the human industry can have severe impact on the climate. Over the past 150 years or so, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have increased tremendously with the expansion of industries and industrial production. The average world temperature has increased by 0.74 degrees since 1901. Studies have shown that the world temperatures have highly fluctuated in the past, and such fluctuations correlate with the carbon dioxide content in the air. Studies and evidences shows that, however, that at no time during the past decades, in the past years, earlier centuries, the carbon dioxide content in the air was not as high as it is today. So in the ancient periods, or in the previous centuries, the carbon dioxide content in the air was not very high. No, the greenhouse gases were not very high, and therefore, the climatic conditions were stable and better for human habitation. However, it has always been below 290 ppm, but in early 2008, it has reached 387 ppm and is continuously rising by around 2 ppm every year. So, we can understand the kind of change that is taking place in the overall climatic condition due to rise in, the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide contents, so on and so forth. So, climate changes as a result of this kind of change poses the greatest threat for human life, especially for livelihood activities and development prospects for the poor and the marginalized people. Now, coming to global warming. Now, global warming is intricately, as we have already discussed, intricately related to climate change, and sometimes there is a tendency to use both the terms synonymously. However, strictly speaking, global warming is just one aspect of climate change, but nevertheless, it is one of the most important drivers of climate change. Apparently, small increases in the average global temperature can lead to very large changes in the aspects of local and global climates. Changes of these warming of the climate or global warming, it leads to changes in precipitation, winds, clouds, humidity, and in temporal and spatial variation and variability, and all of these together also again have multiple other impacts. So, global warming and climate change, they are, posing as major environmental concerns of our contemporary times. Global warming is the slow increase in the average temperature of the Earth's atmosphere because of an increased amount of energy, heat striking the Earth from the sun and is being trapped in the atmosphere and not radiated out into the space. Now, let us try to understand what are the causes of global warming and climate change. Studies suggest that global warming and climate change result from human activity, which we call anthropogenic activities or factors. Scientists attribute current atmospheric warming to human activities that have increased the amount of carbon-containing gases in the upper atmosphere and to increased amount of tiny particles in the lower atmosphere. Specifically, gases released primarily by the burning of fossil fuels and the tiny particles produced by incomplete burning traps the sun's energy in the atmosphere. Scientists call these greenhouse gases because they act like the wrong way reflective glass in our global greenhouse. Scientists dates the beginning of the current warming trend to the end of 18th or the beginning of 19th century when coal first came up into common use. The warming trend has accelerated as we have increased our use of fossil fuel to include gasoline, diesel, kerosene and natural gas, as well as petrochemicals like plastics, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers we now make from oil. Experts attribute that the current warming trends to the increasing use of fossil fuels, because using them releases into the atmosphere stores of carbon that were sequestered or buried millions of years ago. The addition of the old carbon to the world's current stock of carbon, scientists have concluded, is what is heating our Earth, which is causing global warming. Warming of the climate system is unequivocal and can now be firmly attributed to human activity. Numerous long-term changes in the climate have been observed at the continental, regional, ocean, basin scales, including change in the Arctic temperatures and ice, widespread changes in the precipitation amounts, ocean salinity, wind patterns, and aspects of extreme weather, including droughts, heavy precipitation, heat waves, and the intensity of tropical cyclones. So let us now briefly understand what are the impacts of global warming and climate change. The first impact we all observe is the melting of glaciers. Since the early 20th century, with few exceptions, glaciers around the world have been retreating at an unprecedented rates. Some scientists attribute this massive glacial retreat to the Industrial Revolution, with the beginning around 1970. In fact, several ice caps, glaciers, and ice shelves have disappeared altogether in this century. Many more are retreating so rapidly that they may vanish within a matter of decades. The second impact is the rising sea levels. Sea level rise is a major effect of climate change. It has drawn international attention because higher sea levels in the future would cause serious impacts in various parts of the world. Shrinking land, ice glaciers, ice caps, and ice sheets contribute to the half of the total global sea level rise between 1972 to 2008, but its contribution has been increasing more rapidly since the early 1990s. Recent studies suggest that land ice loss added nearly half an inch to the global sea level rise from 2003 to 2007, contributing 75 to 80% of the total increase during that period. The third impact is flooding. Heavy downpours are increasing in many parts of the world owing to the larger climate change, especially over the last 3 to 5 decades. The heaviest rainfall events have become heavier and more frequent, and the amount of rain falling on the heaviest rain days have also increased. Since the 1990s, the amount of rain falling in very heavy precipitation events has been significantly above the average. And this flooding, it has tremendous impact on the land and livelihood, on the life and livelihood of humans. It is a threat to the animals, flora and fauna, so on and so forth. So this flood is a havoc. It causes havoc to human life and livelihood. Another impact of global warming and climate change is droughts. Higher temperatures lead to increased rates of evaporation, including more loss of moisture through plant leaves. Even in areas where precipitation does not decrease, these increases in surface evaporation and loss of water from plants, leading to more rapid drying of soils if the effects of higher temperature are not offset by other changes. As soil dries out, a larger proportion of the incoming heat from the sun goes into the heating of the soil and adjacent air rather than evaporating as moisture, resulting in hotter summers and drier climatic conditions, which again, is a significant threat for human population, for cultivation, for livelihood, so on and so forth. So the more and more droughts we have, there will be famines, there will be lack of agricultural yield, lesser agricultural production, so which will again threat the survival of human beings. Another impact of global warming and climate change that we are witnessing in the contemporary times is heat waves. Heat waves are periods of abnormally hot weather lasting from days to weeks. The number of heat waves have been increasing in the recent years. This trend has continued in 2011 and 12, and gradually, it is increasing with the number of intense heat waves, becoming more and more frequent. These heat waves, they also pose a severe threat to human existence, and it becomes very difficult for human beings to survive in these extreme heat waves, which have become more and more frequent with the every passing year. Another impact of global warming and climate change is increasing tornadoes, cyclones, and hurricanes. Every now and then we hear about cyclones and how destructive they are, how they destroy human habitats, human lives. We also hear about hurricanes and the kind of havoc it creates. So there is a significant global increase in all forms of storms, with maximum wind speeds from 175 km per hour. Storms of 200 km per hour and more have doubled in number over the period of time, and those of 250 km per hour and more have tripled. So, larger storms have tripled, their numbers have increased even more. So, there has been substantial increase in these kind of, hurricanes, tornadoes, so on and so forth, are linked to higher sea surface temperatures in the region that hurricanes form in and move through. Number of factors have been found to influence these local sea surface temperatures, including natural variability, human-induced emissions of heat-trapping gases, and pollution, particulate pollution. So, dear learners, we have seen the kind of changes that is taking place, environmental changes that is taking place owing to global warming and climate change. And this warming, it is projected to increase, every decade. It is projected to increase every year, and if that happens, it is going to cause serious havoc to human life and livelihood. And this would entirely, it would be very difficult for human survival. We know that we have talked about how this global warming and climate change is causing natural changes in the nature, or causing natural phenomena like heat waves, tornadoes, cyclones, or droughts, flooding, etc. Apart from that, it also directly affects human lives and livelihoods negatively across all regions. Increase in the frequency of drought and floods have affected local crop production negatively. In addition, global warming and climate change is directly impacting human health in a number of ways, leading to death and different kinds of illness arising from frequently extreme weather conditions such as heat waves, storms, floods, disruption of food systems, so on and so forth. There are different waterborne diseases that we have now, different health issues owing to the change in the climate, owing to the increase in the global warming or global temperature. Further, climate change is also, impacting the social determinants of good health like livelihood, equality, and access to health care and social support structures, so on and so forth. These climate change and the problems caused by climate change and global warming are disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable and the disadvantaged section of the society, that are women, children, minorities, poor communities, the migrants, displaced, older populations, so on and so forth. And it also, more for people with underlying health conditions. They are also one among the worst victims. Now, according to World Health Organization, let us try to understand how climate change and global warming are, impacting human population. Climate change, according to World Health Organization, is directly contributing to humanitarian emergencies in the form of heat waves, wildfires, floods, tropical storms and hurricanes, and they are increasing in scale, frequency, and intensity. Studies have shown that, people, around 3.6 billion people already live in those areas which are highly vulnerable to climate change. Between 2030 and 2050, the climate change is expected to cause around 250,000 additional deaths per year from undernutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress alone. The direct damage caused to health is estimated to be between 2 to 4 billion US dollars per year by 2030. Areas with weak health infrastructure, mostly in developing countries, will be least able to cope without assistance, preparedness, and response. The World Health Organization also reports that climate change is responsible for at least 1.5 lakh deaths per year, and the number is expected to double by 2030, as we have discussed just now. And as we have already mentioned, the areas, the brunt of, the danger of these changes in the climatic conditions, changes in the climate, in the environment, are disproportionately borne by different sections of the people. Not everybody equally faces the challenges posed by these environmental changes. The poorer, marginalized communities, they are likely to be affected more. The communities which resides near rivers and coast, and which the communities which uses climate sensitive resources, are more prone to extreme weather conditions, and different sections of the people, they have to face the challenges differently. The challenges are different for different sections of the people, with the poor and the marginalized communities being the worst victims of these larger climatic changes. So, dear learners, we have learned that, in the previous module also we have learned about the interrelationship between environment and population growth, how population growth is resulting in changes of environment. And in this module, we have learned about the two major environmental concerns of our time, that is climate change and global warming, and why are they happening, and what are their consequences. How are they altering the environment? They are altering the environment by melting of the glaciers, the rising of the sea levels, the flooding, the drought. These are the ways in which the environment is being altered owing to the global warming and climate change. As a result of these changes, these alterations like rising of sea level, flooding, drought, it is posing serious threats to human survival, because on one hand it is directly impacting human health, and on the other hand it is causing threats for human livelihood. Because crop production has declined, when in times of flood and times of drought, there is tremendous it has tremendous negative impact on agricultural production, so on and so forth. So on one hand, human health is degrading owing to these environmental factors, and on the other hand there is also a threat to human livelihood. Today we have more and more diseases owing to, lack of water scarcity. We have more and more diseases owing to air pollution, water pollution. We have, we have heat waves. We witness cyclones, rapid climatic changes in the climatic condition. All these, pose a threat to human population, increasing in human illness and increasing in the number of human deaths. So, dear learners, we hope you have understood how environment and population are intricately related, because the growth in population, it results in the demand for more and more resources, which leads to destruction of the environment for the sake of construction of buildings, roads, and so on and so forth. And all of these human activities in turn results in a challenge for human beings, because it poses again threat for human survival, because the more we play with nature, the nature will also take its toll. The more, there is environmental degradation, there is environmental destruction, it will have a toll on human beings. Human beings will have to bear the brunt of illness, they will have to bear the brunt of depletion of resources, livelihood facilities, livelihood conditions, so on and so forth. So dear learners, with this we have come to the end of this module. We hope you have understood what has been conveyed in this module, and you have understood how anthropogenic factors are related, are contributing to environmental changes, and how changes in environment and environmental conditions have in turn resulted in negative impact, negative consequences for human beings, human health, human livelihood, so on and so forth. In the next module, we shall be discussing about different policies and programs that have been undertaken for protection of the environment. Thank you.